The United Nations is calling for an investigation into the deaths of 9 people after Cameroonian soldiers reportedly opened fire on fleeing civilians. The military denies wrongdoing, saying the raid was conducted on separatist positions. It says it came under fire from terrorists at the same time. The African Nations Championship kicks off in Cameroon today. The state of insecurity in the southwest and the northwest is far beyond the control of the government and the Cameroon armed forces. There are also concerns for the safety and security of visitors and supporters who will be attending the games in Limbe. We also continue to monitor developments in Uganda, where elections went ahead on Thursday. For more, we're joined by Dalen from Dalen, who's a country risk analyst. Daniel, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. So the UN is now calling for an investigation into the deaths that took place in Cameroon. A handful of very innocent people were killed at the hands of the soldiers in Cameroon. What are your thoughts on this and how the UN is handling it, or at least getting involved?
Good morning, Jacob, and thank you so much for having me on, and good morning to your viewers. In terms of the United Nations, I think we saw a similar alleged killing by the Cameroonian armed forces back in February 2020. And again, we saw a similar response by the United Nations where they called for an investigation, and the Cameroonian government eventually admitted to undertaking the civilian killings. And they said, okay, well, here were 2 soldiers that were involved and we're going to prosecute them, and that was the end of that. And that seemed to basically stem any sort of criticism from the United Nations, the US, and the UK and France, who were all the biggest kind of critics of the previous attack. So we'll probably see something similar this time. As always, there's very little recourse that often happens in these types of situations, especially somewhere like Cameroon, where it doesn't necessarily depend on someone like the United States as a trade partner, and other countries like the UK, where unless France is actually going to do something, I don't think anything is really going to come out from this, especially from the UN side.
Now, with the issue of Anglophone separatist fighters in that region, it seems as though it's been going on for some time. The separatist fighting with the Cameroonian army, I mean, it's been at least 4 years when this is happening. When does that actually come to an end? It seems as though there's no end in sight for the violence that's been taking place in that cocoa-rich area.
Yes, it is quite a difficult thing in terms of if you want to predict a conclusion. There have been many attempts at dialogue through mediators. I know a few years ago they attempted talks in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that at the end of 2019, in Paul Biya's New Year's address, he stated that there is no diplomatic end to this. It will end through a military intervention. And as we've seen, that's just not working. So at this point, the conflict that has started in 2017, I don't really see it ending anytime soon. And if one were to consider the potential for any sort of resolution, it becomes even harder when you start to think that there are over 29 separatist groups operating in those regions, and you would need to get almost all of them on board, not just the big ones. So I don't think there's a immediate or definite timeline that one can give to the end of this conflict.
What's the African Union's role in all of this? I mean, we're hearing the UN calling for an investigation. Has the African Union had any comment on this matter in Cameroon?
No, and I think, again, it'll be something similar where there's a statement, a condemnation of the event, but in terms of their actual role in intervening in these abuses that do take place quite frequently in Cameroon, there's no actual interventionary measures that can be expected from the AU itself.
Daniel, let's quickly move away from Cameroon for a second and look at what took place in Uganda on Thursday. Many people went to the polls despite COVID-19 being a massive challenge there. Soldiers were out in their numbers as well, monitoring the situation in Uganda. Bobi Wine taking on Yoweri Museveni as the official opposition. Does he stand a chance in this round of elections?
I Listen, what we're looking at the moment in terms of the official ballot results that are coming out of the Electoral Commission, we're seeing Yoweri Museveni with a comfortable 61% lead, if I'm not mistaken, and Bobby Wine with about 30%. And it's quite interesting to think that in the 2016 election, Kizza Besigye, the former kind of rival of Yoweri Museveni, also received 30%, and Yoweri Museveni received 60% as well. So I don't think we're going to see a shift in this margin. I know that there were incidents of irregularities reported specifically during the presidential part of the ballot, not so much during the parliamentary section. But I'll be blunt and say I don't think that Bobby Wine will be able to take Yoweri Museveni on in the first round. I just don't foresee it happening.
And let's talk about the issues that were plaguing Bobby Wine's election campaign. I think one of the big talkers that have been trending on social media, for instance, over the past few days has been the internet block in Uganda. Does that not hamper freedom of speech?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is something that we've seen in a few elections this year already. We saw it in Tanzania, we saw it in Guinea, we saw it in Ivory Coast, where there were some sort of disruptions to either internet or social media around the time. And I think this is a trend that will continue going, especially in certain countries where you have the strong man in power and, you know, these older autocrats, dictator types. I would be scared to maybe use that term completely. But yeah, absolutely. I think within these elections, freedom of speech is exceptionally important. And by blocking out the internet, you're cutting it completely. And I also think that in this case, where they blocked out the internet, it was a bit unfortunate because the biometric scanning machines that were used in the elections required an internet connection. So you ended up actually seeing many of them fail on the day, and delaying many voting processes, which is part of the irregularities that were reported on the day.
Daniel, on that note, let me bring in some of the social media reactions that have come out from other regions to what has been happening in Uganda. Let's have a look at the hashtag Uganda Decide 2021 on social media right now. So this tweet coming in saying Bobby Wine could have been so naive to think winning votes could make him topple Museveni in Uganda Decide 2021. Sometimes you have to be rational and think outside the box. Votes alone ain't gonna stop the African dictators. Next tweet. Only in Africa, the military has the supreme power over a man's life. Bobby Wine running to the press for help against the military forces that is meant to protect them. Then the military threatening to shoot them is the most insane video today. Hashtag Uganda Decide 2021. Another one coming in here from Liz Cook saying, after much resistance, Bobby Wine continues with young people coming out in droves to support a new victory. Museveni must ensure the safety of Bobby and his family as well as millions of supporters. Hashtag Uganda Decide 2021. Tomorrow is a new day. Cheaters take time to uncover. And the final tweet here, if there is actually true democracy in Uganda, then H.E. Bobby Wine should be the next president of Uganda because I know Uganda voted for him, but I pray they don't manipulate the results like a president did in one African country like that. Hashtag Uganda Decide. And my final question to you, Daniel, it's obviously we're seeing the reactions out there on Bobby Wine being a proper contender to Yoweri Museveni, but the 4-decade rule or ruling since the 80s seems as though it won't stop him from actually gripping on the power of Uganda, specifically not letting other opponents, political opponents, hamper his election campaign.
Yeah, absolutely not. So what you have is an interesting dynamic because he is also he has a lot of favor with the armed forces as well. So any sort of win by an opposition, there are obviously concerns that it may be rejected by the armed forces as well. And again, if you have a person and a party in power for that long, a change in that regard is very unlikely. You know, at the end of the day, there is still a support base, irrespective of irregularities, and a substantial support base at that. Obviously, what we're seeing here, 60% for Museveni and the 30% for Wine, doesn't necessarily add up to the support that we saw for Wine heading into this election. But a shift in power in Uganda is very unlikely, and I think Museveni will hold on for as long as he can, especially after reducing the age limit back in 2017, if I recall. And then when they removed the two-term presidential limit in 2005, it just paved a path for basically a never-ending ruler, and it will be Museveni.
I think it's a never-ending discussion that is taking place across the entire African continent, where this type of rule seems to be going on for quite some time. I mean, Yoweri Museveni being one of the longest-standing presidents or statesmen on the African continent. Daniel van Dalen, we'll leave it right there. Thank you for your time. He's a country risk analyst with the updates on the latest in Cameroon and Uganda. Of course, he'll be joining us probably next week when we look at the results that have come out of Uganda and anything else that's taking place on the African continent.